It takes a little while to get on Facebook,
Yeah.
eh? Hmm.
Yeah. So we are live now. So
Perfect.
um, perfect. Hi, everybody. This is Lainey, and I am coming to you live from Mexico. And I have the wonderful honor of speaking with Jonathan Van Viegen, who is broadcasting from Canada. And Jonathan and his wife are a lovely family that I met, had the distinct honor of meeting in Thailand a couple of years ago
Hmm.
now. And I interviewed Jonathan for the virtual summit that we just launched in January or February. And I'm really excited because part of the mental health series with the therapists that I've been interviewing have been focused on self care for self and focusing on children, and their mental health. Today, we're going to sort of shift the idea a little bit and talk about mental health and wellness for the couple, for the marriage. And I realized that maybe for world schoolers, it may not be the case, but for many folks that haven't had such intense time with their spouse, with their partner, some things may be coming up. And I thought perhaps this conversation would address maybe some strategies for keeping the marriage sane and keeping the commitment alive. So, welcome, Jonathan. Why don't you give us a brief introduction to who you are and what you focus on?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Lainey. It's a real pleasure to be on here with you today. And just as you said, my wife and I, we sold everything a couple years ago, and we literally sold everything, including Christmas decorations, started traveling the world with our two girls. And we met at the summit, the family summit in Thailand. Yeah, it was about almost 2 years ago now. Uh, and I started out, well, I'm a marriage and family therapist, so I help couples and families. Mainly couples is probably my specialization. And while we were, concocting this dream to go traveling on the road, one of the big reasons why we thought we could make it happen is because I'm an online therapist. And so I built up the online therapist side of my business. And now I actually train therapists how to launch high ticket coaching practices and you basically market themselves and build and launch their online practices, which is really relevant in today's climate. And up until a week and a half ago, we were living in Japan, and we'd just come back from a month in Thailand, a month in Vietnam, and a month in Bali. And we returned to Japan thinking, we're going to kind of shelter in place there because we have residency, and we were having a little bit of trouble extending our visa, and we didn't want to find out this week that we had to get on a plane and leave. So we decided let's leave early. So about a week and a half ago, we came back to Toronto. So we're in Toronto now, and by the looks of it, we could be here 12 to 18 months, depending on how all this stuff shakes out. But we are anxious to get back on the road, and we are anxious to get back doing the things we love to do, which is practice and live all over the world. So. Mm-hmm.
And actually, this brings up a really good question that I want to just sort of dive head into. Families have been faced um, with making decisions on the fly right now that they don't have the ability to weigh out options or to have long discussions about, or maybe they do have long discussions. But most of the decisions that need to be made right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to a couple or family who are not on the same page in terms of what they think is the right choice?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question because I know we were in the same place, Meredith and I, that's my wife. And, when we were in Vietnam, we struggled. Do we go back to Japan? And should I just go back to Japan and wrap our stuff up and then go back to Hoi An and shelter in place in Hoi An? And I think we've got to be responsible parents, and we've really got to operate under the assumption that, as much as our leaders are telling us what we should listen to and what we should believe, but most political leaders are telling overseas citizens to come home. Our prime minister said, Canadians come home. And you don't want to be caught in this climate where you're overseas, where you lack medical insurance. We have safety wing medical insurance, and we just found out that they put Japan on the list, they put Canada on the list. So if you're in Canada even and you have safety wing medical insurance, overseas travel insurance, it's probably not going to work anymore. So you really need to be intentional about where you're choosing to live. And ride out this kind of particular tumultuous storm. That said, my gut would be to listen to the parent or listen to the partner who's got the most concern and whose comfort level isn't the best. So if one person's saying we need to go home and the other person's saying we need to stay, you really need to look at the rationale and the reasons why someone would want to stay versus why someone would want to go. And someone wanting to stay is more likely thinking, I have no place to return to when we get back to our home country. We've sold our house or we sold our possessions. We got to go move in with people. I don't necessarily want to be in Canada, as Meredith was saying. She wanted to continue in Vietnam. Whereas my concerns were, I don't want to be stuck in a foreign country without health insurance and, potentially being quarantined and whatnot. And so I think you do well to consider the rationale and the reasons why someone wants to stay versus why someone would want to go. And if someone wants to stay in place in whatever country you find yourself in just because you don't want to be back in your home country, I don't think that supersedes or should override the overarching reason to go back, where you've got supports of family, you've got supports of friends, you've got your national health insurance you could probably access. And so I would probably weigh the options and see what the comfort level is on both sides. This is a crazy period right now, and I think we're just kind of entering into our steep curve like Italy has been going through, and it's just tragic what's happening around the world. I light a candle now every night and put it in the front window of our house, just for the medical staff and all the people around the world that are struggling with this. And I will say, I love traveling overseas, and you'd never hear from me saying I want to go back to Canada, or let alone say I'm happy to be in Canada. But I do have to say, being close to family and close to supports during this time, I am happy to be here in Canada. So I think we made the right choice.
Yeah, and you know what? Every family makes the choice that's right for them. But I really want to focus on how strategies on how couples can remain a team. So I guess my next question would be, if you find that couples are together in this time, well, couples are together and they are experiencing a time of stress because of the world around them is in a very, very stressful place. What do you say to couples who go into a habit of pushing each other's buttons?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think one thing that we do really well is to recognize and understand that so I see couples and families as the inside of a snow globe. And so when it's resting on a shelf and the conditions are perfect, everything's visible, everything's clear. You can look at the beauty of the painting, of all the figurines and whatnot, and the little houses, and everything looks serene and it's perfect. But add in the coronavirus, add in travel. And we all know that travel days shake up families, right? You don't let alone a coronavirus, just changing countries throws people and families for a loop for the next 2-3 days. I know when we would pack up and leave Vietnam to go to Thailand, for example, just that travel day, even if it was in the same time zone, it was still tumultuous. So what couples do really well is to acknowledge the fact that they are a beautiful couple, they're a beautiful family, but they're just under a set of circumstances that is requiring them to operate with enormous stressors on them. And so what that does is it shakes up that snow globe, and it makes it really difficult to see how things are perfect and how things are great and the beauty in each other, because you can't see it, because you just see the snow, the blizzard in between, right? So my advice for couples, and even whether they're making a decision where should they shelter in place in whichever country they find themselves in, or should they still be moving around during this difficult climate, or let's say they're just self-isolating at home, they do really well to place the blame for the pushing of the buttons, not on each other, but place the blame on the set of circumstances we all find ourselves in. And just doing that is going to alleviate 50% of the problems and the disagreements that's happening between a couple, I think, at least anyway.
So, what are some of the ways people can not be in sort of reaction mode and start looking at kind of the reality around them? Do you have any, I don't know, like, step one, step two, step three, step back,
Yeah.
breathe, or whatever. Yeah.
Well, for me, my approach is it starts with having common goals as a couple. So the very first thing that you want to do right now today is sit down with your partner, even if the kids are kind of, if you get a little bit of a break, sit down and spend 10, 15 minutes with your partner and write out some goals for the day, some goals for the week, and some goals for the next month during this challenging time. So that, because what's going to happen is you guys are going to get on the same page. Now, I've been saying this for years, but any couple that's speaking in terms of the love languages, for example, one of my favorite books to burn, by the way, not books to live your or guide your relationship. But that book, for example, tells couples how they're different. It tells one partner says, I love intimacy. The other person says, well, I love acts of service. And the other one says, and so what happens is we just get, we get a mirror held up in terms of how we're different from our partner. Well, couples don't need more differences. They need sameness. They need to be on the same page. And that's what creating those common goals are. So set some goals for the day and set some goals for the week and set some goals for the month. And you're going to start talking about how each partner can input into the family system and into the relationship to help those goals be achieved. And when that happens, then you got two people working towards a common goal, and they're not going to be pushing each other's buttons, but they're going to be supporting each other and lifting each other up. And so that's the very first place I start.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love it every time you say burn that book. I've interviewed you several times, and I just think it's so important what you're saying, focusing on the similarities and not the differences. And I think that's such a key for right now.
Yeah.
In terms of individual self-care, do you have any suggestions? And the reason why I'm asking this to a marriage therapist is because I know when you come to a marriage or to a relationship, after you've taken care of oneself, you're coming as a whole person or in a better place. What suggestions would you have for self-care in a time like this?
Well, and that goes directly to the goals, right? So I look at, so for example, Meredith, she really needs to do yoga. She likes to, she wants to do that every day. I'm struggling with some major thoracic back pain in my upper back. I think it's from being hunched over and on my phone. But what a couple does really well is to really place those individual personal goals really high on the priority list. But one of the biggest challenges I find is that couples are eager to carve out time for individual self-care, but they're not as eager and intentional about carving out time for the relationship. And we're guilty of it too. Like we're by no means perfect, but the next thing you know, a week will go by and we've done nothing for our relationship. We haven't maybe made love. We haven't held hands. We haven't played a game. We haven't had a conversation. We haven't cuddled and watched a show together. So we really need to make sure that you prioritize that couple time just as much as you do the individual self-care time. And it doesn't have to, it's never going to be the same. Like there's that old joke where you can take a marble and put it in a glass jar for every time you have sex with your partner before marriage, and then take a marble out every single time you have sex after marriage, and you'll never empty the jar. So yes, it's true, but it still doesn't mean that we don't make an all-out effort to fill that jar or to take those marbles out during these times. So just make sure that you come up with a goal of whether it's once a week to prioritize that couple time. And the way I would do that is I would go back and find out what you guys did during that honeymoon phase of your relationship. What did you guys really like to do as a couple? Now, Meredith and I, we liked cooking dinner together and watching a movie. That was one of the things that we always did together. I liked to cook. She would hang out and we'd watch a movie. And not, usually back then we'd have sex. It was like, you know, we were crazy like bunnies back in the early days, right? So now what we do is if we get the kids down, then we'll cook, we'll watch a movie, and we'll hang out and enjoy that time together. And so we try to recreate and bring back into our relationship the things that we did way early back on that we really enjoyed doing. So that would be my suggestion.
And now people have time.
Yes, and now you got time. So who knows? You may have more kids in the next 9 months. So, yeah.
Amazing. So that's looking forward on the positive side. And there is always the reality that these stresses may take over somebody's relationship. When is it the right time to seek outside help for a relationship? When do you know it's time for you to look for support?
Well, I'm gonna say, as a couples therapist, my success rate with couples is probably 50-50, and that's probably an exceptionally high success rate. So by the time couples are at the point where they say, I'm seeking out relationship help, you either have the couples that they are both all in on the relationship and they've closed, you know, the door to divorce or separation isn't on the table, and for them it's about functioning better. But for the couples where the question of divorce looms or separation looms, usually by then you're about a year too late. You're about a year late to the game. You should have been here a year ago working on your relationship and not pushing it, waiting so long. And it's sad that a lot of couples make it the kind of the last thing that they do before they split up. My advice would be to make a commitment to yourself, and typically like 6 months, I would say at least, to your partner, and say, look, we're going to put an all-out effort here to rebuild and rekindle our relationship and do everything that we can possible to recover what we had and to build even better. I mean, the stock market's taking a hammering, and if the stock market can recover, so can relationships, you know. But it just takes work. It takes that 100% acknowledgement that I'm part of the problem as much as I can be part of the solution, and so I'm going to commit for the next 6 months to correcting this, right? So my advice would be, whatever time you recognize that you need help, go and get the help that you need, but then just make yourself and your partner a commitment that you're going to work hard at it for the next 6 months, and most times you're going to be successful at reaching those goals. So.
And what I heard you say was really empowering, because it put the power back into the couple based on their commitment. So that to me is really positive also.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. And do you have any final pieces of advice? I know this is very, very high level, but maybe something that you feel from your heart that couples need to hear right now, as we're all facing a time of uncertainty.
Well, I would say that no matter how stressed or how difficult a relationship can be, there's always good things happening on a daily basis. With some of the couples that I've had that have been near divorce, or that they've actually been to a divorce attorney, the sheer fact that they would show up to a therapy session as a couple together is evidence and indication that they're on the same page. At least they're on the same page for one thing, right? So what you want to do is you want to start noticing where you're on the same page with your partner, no matter how minute and small it is, whether it is, you clean the bathrooms and I clean the kitchen, or I do the laundry, right? Then you can at least be on the same page about being great at dividing the chores of the household, right? So start looking for how you're the same. And it brings me back to that book, The 5 Love Languages, because it just highlights how you're different. Start looking at where you're the same and notice it, And if you go so far as to acknowledge to your partner and you say, hey, you know what, I really appreciate that we're on the same page here. Just pay attention to what they say to you next. Like, I know if I walk up to Meredith right now and I say, I really appreciate that you've been hanging out with the kids while I've been nursing my back for the last 3 weeks, she's going to smile, right? It's really hard to say and give someone a compliment where they don't smile back at you. And I know when I do that to her, I know that it's going to lighten her mood and she's going to make an effort towards me. So when couples start noticing how they're on the same page and how they're both inputting into the relationship and inputting into the system and acknowledging that to one another, you see the snowball move very quickly. So.
And I love that. I practice the acknowledgement of appreciation with my son too. I think that goes across the board. Thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. And as always, it's always so wonderful to connect to you. And you always have these inspirational words. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you to put your links in the live thread so people can get more information about you.
Sure. People can DM me too if they have any questions. I'm happy to give a referral or anything like that if they need to. And I was just going to say, I'm really jealous of where you are because it's pretty cold here and I'm looking out at those palm trees. I'm like, wow, I really want to be there with the grass huts and whatnot. So we're excited to get back to our traveling lifestyle. So. Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's a bad thing that people are grounding for a little bit. It's okay. It's really okay. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Very soon.
My pleasure. Right. Bye now.
Bye.